This is a short video explanation that goes along with the assignments for Chapter 36. Just a reminder that the images within this presentation are in the public domain, and please don't hesitate to give me an email or a phone call if you have any questions regarding this presentation. This is a short presentation going over Chapter 36, the Cold War, 1945 to 1952, and these pages are all questions that go along with the textbook. Chapter 36. The first couple pages of Chapter 36 kind of focus on the post-war economic anxieties of domestic United States, the faltering economy of the initial post-war years that threatened to confirm the world's worst predictions that potentially we would just revert back to the Great Depression years, the pre-World War II Great Depression years. And so read the couple first pages here. We'll talk about the Taft-Hartley Act and also the Operation Dixie Employment Act of 1946, the GI Bill. And then we get into kind of this gradual introduction of a long economic boom from 1950 to 1970. And so like questions number 4 and 5 about 1950. The American economy surged, excuse me, surged into a dazzling plateau of sustained growth, and this lasted for at least 2 decades. And then number 5, by 1973, Americans were some 6% of the world's population, but were enjoying about 40% of the planet's wealth. And then we get into the question number 6 and 7 on page 832. So the size of the middle class could be defined as households earning between $3,000 and $10,000. And these can be found, these answers, questions number 6 and number 7 and number 8 can be found on page 832. So the first couple pages in Chapter 36 deal with kind of the domestic economic policies. As you move into the next page, we'll talk about Levittown, and again the economic boom that kind of contributes both to white flight but also suburbia America. The Sun Belt is mentioned. If you look on page 835, number 13, these dramatic shifts of population and wealth further broke the historical grip of the North on the nation's political life. Every elected occupant of the White House from 1964 to 2008 hailed from the Sun Belt. And then even more importantly, the region's congressional representation rose. That has huge ramifications. The representation rose. Then we move on to question 23 in the Cold War. And you can find those answers on page 841, but just the idea that communist Red Russia is taking over, and we move into this kind of anti-communist hysteria. And there's some questions here about Stalin and some of the agreements that were made at Yalta, but how they are not necessarily listened to or abided by. The Russians kind of ignore these. Then on the next page we'll get into kind of the war trials that existed in Nuremberg. We also then have the Berlin airlift and the reunite, or the kind of the building of what became the East Germany and the West Germany, and then the Berlin conflict. So hopefully you can educate yourself a little bit on that, at least some background information. Then we have the Truman Doctrine and the Marshall Plan introduced in this chapter, and this idea that aid to Greece and Turkey is very important, but are we just kind of blindly throwing money at the policy? at the countries. So find some information about the Marshall Plan here, the Marshall Plan, and the 40 million with the Truman, 400 million, excuse me, with the Truman Doctrine. These are also links. If you click on these images and this idea that the Department of Defense, the CIA, and other important organizations, the national, other important security devices and agencies are formed kind of right after World War II, beginning the Cold War. So again, some of the anti-communist hysteria was increased with the Rosenbergs and the way in which they are caught spying on the United States and selling atomic secrets to the Soviets. We also then have this anti-communist hysteria illustrated with the House of Un-American Activities Committee, HUAC, and that's on page 852. But you have Nixon, the young Richard Nixon, before he's even vice president. He eventually becomes vice president for Eisenhower. The young Richard Nixon ferreting out the alleged communists that exist in our country and the heightened kind of hysteria and paranoia that existed in this early post-World War II Cold War era. We'll spend time in class talking about the Korean War, but that's mentioned on page 854. There's some maps here that are good to look at on page 856. Hopefully we can visit more about that with the presentation for the chapter. But also we have the election, and read about this crazy picture that exists with President Truman and his newspaper from the Chicago Tribune saying that Dewey wins the election. There's a major error there, famous American history photograph there. And these are all hyperlinks to the site where you can find more information about the election of 1948, found on page 853. But also we have then the Korean War, and we'll spend more time talking about that in class. So on this last page, the Korean War is mentioned also, and then the scandal that occurs, or the controversy with Douglas MacArthur, the commander. Remember, he was the very important commander in World War II in the Pacific, and then he also takes over in Korea, but runs into some problems with Truman, and eventually he is asked to resign. So that concludes the short presentation video explanation of the questions for Chapter 36. Again, the images within this presentation are in the public domain. Thank you.